have time for some questions. Any filmmakers in the audience? I want to see La La Land, or when Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are 75. What's that going to be? So we covered a lot of territory here, and want to get into a little bit of specificity. Angelo.
Thanks a lot. You know, when you travel to Mexico or China, you really realize very quickly that parks are just so vitally important to them. Even in many of the poorer areas in Mexico, there's always an El Centro, a place where people go to gather in the evening. And I'm just wondering, is there, based on your knowledge here, is there something missing here that we need to do? I know we don't make the investments in parks that we should, but is that changing, and do you see things improving with regard to access to parks that are places you want to be in? These aren't just converted lots that are grass, but these are true parks.
If you're asking me, I would say that no, I have not seen that. I think that the parks are still using the old model of park design, where we have, and actually I think Debbie showed it, the very same type of standardized elements in parks, and we have a much more diverse population. Even if, you know, I can talk about why girls are not so much at the park, middle school girls, they don't find the swings and the slides that exciting. And we have done nothing to make the park much more closer to the 21st century. We keep using the same old model of park design, which can bring some park, and the underutilization has something to do with that, has a lot to do with also safety. But we have not given, we have these parks that are, you know, wonderful assets for the city, but we have not thought about what type of facilities, what type of programs, what type of design we can use that is tailored to the particular needs of the surrounding communities. And this has not happened. And that's why we see tremendous underutilization.
I think there's a lot of difference across the U.S. So there are some cities where the citizens have allocated money specifically for the parks, and those cities are creating new, dynamic, exciting parks. But especially in the Midwest and the South, where population is declining, there's very little investment in cities, and a lot of the park directors that we talked to said that they have too much parkland, they can't even maintain it. So there's a huge imbalance. You know, we spend $10,000 per capita, more than that, for health care. And the average per capita expenditure on parks is something in the range of $70 to $80. And just think, what do people spend every month on their cable bill? I mean, we are so captivated. We're spending most of our leisure time in front of screens. And we just need to invest more in parks to activate them. I mean, the problem is that parks are free, right? And there's no capitalist incentive, right, to do that, there's no money making. But somehow we have to invest in it as a society and realize that this is important for the common good.
Dr. Cohen and I'm sorry,
Anastasia.
Anastasia. Those were very important presentations, so thank you very much for looking at an underlooked at area. I was wondering if some of the gender disparities were related to the leadership and staffing of the park. From what I know from some personal anecdotes from Northern California parks, there have been terrific problems with women's role in the parks and leadership, and then of course the U.S. Park Service. You certainly wouldn't choose a career in the Park Service if you were concerned about gender issues, and on the leadership or lower mid-management level. So I'm just curious to what degree, Deborah, were you able to look at the management issues and the age and management issues to see what role that may or may not play?
Well, I just think it's a whole, just a cultural issue across the U.S. I mean, we had Title IX, right? We're supposed to spend as much in schools, right, on sports for girls as we are with boys. But even that has not really made sports equitable between, you know, females and males. So this is just beyond, you know, just the park staffing. This is an entire social issue for our country.
I have some specific responses to that, and I think it depends on the context. So for example, for neighborhood parks, issues of safety are, and especially in inner city, are affecting very much the gender participation. So even I have had a study of middle schoolers, parents are much more unlikely to leave their girls in places where they're not supervised activities than the boys. Younger women, there is very rarely that you'll see younger women on their own going to the park. You see younger men on their own. They usually have to be in groups. And so the most you see women in the parks is with their kids. As you said, women are still the primary caregiver. So issues of safety, issues of cultural norms are very much affect, and we have these gender disparities, as well as, you know, what type of sports you emphasize, how do you make it more desirable, etc. But you also raised another issue about staff, and I think for parks that are ex-urban, I'm doing some work now for state parks, which are really the large preserves that are mostly outside urban areas. And there you find that who is the staff? And they're very concerned that the users are very white and not diverse. And you find that also the staff are very white. And so there is some discrepancy about in ethnic communities, and I would say probably in terms of gender too, that if the park ranger is always or mostly men, that has an effect also as to who do you get to attract. And I think use is an important thing, but you also have to study who are the people who do not go to the parks and why. And you find some interesting.
The city of Los Angeles Rec and Parks is trying to mitigate the disparity. They do subsidize a huge program for, it's called Girls Play Here. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but they are really attracting way more girls than they have in the past with these new programs. I give them a lot of credit for that.
Okay, let's try to squeeze in one last question here.
When we talk about, Raymond Neutra, when we talk about parks, we tend to think about these big, an acre with grass. But what about pocket parks, many more of them, with maybe some space for some food vendors and tables for chess or bocce ball or things like that for elderly people? In your survey, were they all rather large parks, or did you get into pocket parks at all?
Yes, no, that's a very good point. And usually Parks and Recreation Department do not have the facilities to buy large parks, and the one that I mentioned that is being developed now, it's less than a third of an acre. And you don't, especially when you talk to, you're referring to older adults, they don't need the huge parks. They don't need the baseball fields. And some of the pocket parks, quite strategically inserted into neighborhoods, could do a huge amount of good. And you can find, again, if you look into the inner city, you have a lot of vacant, underutilized land empty lots that used to be surface parking. So these could be relatively easily turned into these smaller pocket parks where you can have people congregating, doing some gardening, possibly having a few low-impact exercise machines. Does not need to be acres and acres.
So the 50 Parks Initiative from LA, they're mostly building very small parks. I mean, we did have an opportunity to assess the impact of small parks, and we did a before and after study, but it was kind of silly maybe because before they were empty, like nobody was there, right? And then afterwards, we counted hundreds of people using them. So, there are also parks that were designed to these small pocket parks where they have fences and they lock them. And some of them, once they opened, they had problems with gangs. And so they ended up closing them. I think there's a lot of issue with safety, the design, fencing, the sight lines. We just need a lot more research to understand, what is the combination of attributes that are going to make a smaller park successful.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's all the time we have, but later this afternoon we have the breakout sessions, and we have an open space, green space, park space breakout session that's going to be outside, translating some of these findings into action. One more standing ovation for these great speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.